All hands, prepare for arrival. We've got a human war vessel approaching. Captain Varek's voice was low, steady, but carried an edge of tension as he stood before the laser plasma display. The cool, pale light of the room bathed his sharp features, casting long shadows over the alien command deck. His tail flicked nervously behind him, a rare sign of unease. The crew around him went still. The buzz of the control room, usually filled with idle chatter and data updates, came to an abrupt halt. The air, thick with the scent of metallic alloys, seemed to press down on everyone, carrying the weight of the unknown. The hum of the central power systems, always present in the background, felt louder now, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Varek's claws clicked against the console as he adjusted the zoom on the heads-up display, bringing the approaching vessel into sharper view. It was a sleek, dark shape, almost too symmetrical to be a standard warship. Its edges gleamed with a dull sheen, as if it were designed to reflect any light that came near it. A subtle pulse of energy rippled across the display as the ship's shields flickered, briefly sparking in a way that sent a shiver through Varek's spine. "Status?" Varek asked, his voice cutting through the tension. The tactical officer, Commander Brell, was already at his console, the soft click of his fingers against the keys, the only sound that broke the stillness. He didn't look up, eyes locked on the display. The human vessel. It's not engaging any weapon systems. It's keeping a defensive stance, but there's something off about it. It's moving too precisely, almost as if it's anticipating our every shift. Varek clenched his jaw. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected from the humans. He'd seen the reports, understood the rumors about their unorthodox tactics, but this level of caution was unlike anything his people had encountered before. No species had ever maintained such a cool, calculated stance in the face of potential aggression. "Prepare the fleet," Varek ordered sharply. "No weapons fired unless they act first. We'll observe, but be ready." His voice was an anchor, steadying the crew as the seconds stretched long. They all knew the stakes. The human ships were not like the peaceful traders they had encountered in the past. The warnings from scouts who had encountered them in the outer sectors spoke of ferocity and power, but there was always the question, was it bluff or reality? Now they would find out. Brell glanced up, his eyes narrowing. "It's making a move, Captain. Adjusting position." Varek leaned forward, his eyes scanning the data flashing across the display. The human vessel was shifting, slowly at first, but then faster, settling into a new formation that kept its broadside to them. It wasn't an aggressive stance, yet. But Varek's instincts screamed that it was one of readiness, waiting like a predator poised just outside its prey's reach. "Can you get a reading on their weapons?" Varek asked. "No weapons primed, sir, but we're getting significant energy fluctuations from their engines. It's as if they're charging up, but they haven't locked onto any specific target." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The air felt thick with anticipation, like the stillness before a storm. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of uniforms, the quiet shuffling of feet, the sharp intakes of breath. Varek could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest, a moment where the wrong move could lead to disaster. "Shields at maximum strength," Varek ordered, his claws tapping against the console in thought. "But no offense unless we're fired upon. Maintain communication channels open, Brell." Brell nodded, then looked up. His face was hard, but the edge of uncertainty in his eyes betrayed his composure. "Sir, we are not the only fleet in range. The humans are clearly aware of our numbers. They're testing us." "Then we'll show them the strength of the assembly," Varek replied, his voice now firm, though something in his chest tightened. Every tactical advantage in his favor meant nothing if the humans were planning something entirely different, something that had yet to reveal itself. Suddenly the comms crackled to life with a voice that was calm, almost too calm. "This is Captain James of the Earth vessel Thunder. We come in peace and seek diplomatic contact." The words hit the room like a shockwave, sending ripples of confusion and suspicion through the crew. Varek's brow furrowed. "Earth? Vessel Thunder?" he repeated, as if trying to understand the significance of the name. He tapped into the database, pulling up whatever they knew about this ship. "Human," Brell said, his voice tight. This is unexpected. Earthships are known for their fierce engagements, not for diplomacy. Varric nodded slowly. What do they want? This is not the way any species we've encountered approaches contact. Let's see how they respond, Varric said, though his mind raced with calculations, trying to predict what this diplomatic approach meant. Transmit our standard greeting. Keep the shields up. If they make a move... Before he could finish, the communications officer spoke again, his voice high with urgency. Captain, they're adjusting their shields and their weapons. They've powered down, but their energy levels are rising. What do you mean, rising? Varric asked, voice tight. It's like they're... The officer paused, scanning the readings. They're preparing to brace themselves for something, but they aren't aiming any weapons. A knot formed in Varric's stomach. This was no ordinary encounter. The humans were calculating, prepared as if they had planned for every possible reaction. But why now? Why did they approach with this new, almost unnervingly peaceful stance? We need more intel, Varric muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He straightened, a flicker of realization igniting in his mind. There was something else at play here, something beyond strategy. Something about these humans made them unpredictable in ways that no other species had been before. Prepare for anything, he said, finally meeting Brell's eyes. We will see how this plays out, but be ready to move at a moment's notice. The air in the control room felt heavy, thick with uncertainty. Every member of the crew felt the shift. Their hands hovered near weapons controls, their eyes never leaving the laser plasma display. The human war vessel Thunder sat just beyond their reach, its defensive posture giving nothing away, and Varric could feel it, the sensation that this encounter was going to change everything. The silence in the command center deepened as the message from Captain James echoed in the quiet of the ship. We come in peace and seek diplomatic contact. The words reverberated in the air, a contrast to the tension that gripped the crew. Varric's tail flicked again, an involuntary response to the pressure mounting in the room. He could feel every muscle coiled, ready for a fight, but his mind raced with the thought that this encounter was not like any he had ever faced. Something about the human ship's approach, its calculated restraint, gnawed at him. They were not like the others. They weren't driven by immediate aggression, and that was the most dangerous part. Shields at maximum. Keep them steady, Varric ordered, his voice unwavering, though his mind flickered with uncertainty. His sharp eyes remained fixed on the laser plasma display, watching the human vessel hover just outside their range. The intricate patterns of energy flows along its hull seemed to shimmer unnervingly in the depths of space, like some dark, elegant predator biding its time. Brell, the tactical officer, worked quickly, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his console as he updated the data feed. They're still not powering up their weapons, but Captain, their ship, it's not idle. There's a subtle increase in their energy output, but it's not directed at us. It's like they're preparing for something, but not an attack, almost like... He hesitated, eyes flicking between the display and Varric's face. Like they're waiting for us to make the first move. Varric's grip tightened around the edge of his console. He could feel it, too, the strange stillness of the moment. The human ship wasn't moving like a normal adversary. It wasn't seeking a fight, but it also wasn't backing down. The unknown stretched between them like a wall of mist, thick and impenetrable. Can we get a better reading on their defensive systems? Varric asked, his voice a quiet command. The tension in his chest was starting to spread through his limbs. Brell didn't look up as he adjusted the readings on his display. Their shields are advanced, Captain. I'm not sure what kind of energy sources they're using, but our scans are barely scratching the surface. It's as though their entire ship is one massive energy field, a single unit. No fissures, no weak points visible. Varric didn't like the sound of that. The human ship was like a closed fist, compact and impenetrable. What about their hull? What's it made of? It's hard to say, Brell continued. Our scans aren't picking up anything we recognize. It's not any metal we've encountered. It's too dense, too smooth. It's almost as if they've crafted a material specifically to deflect our scans. Varric frowned. A ship with a surface designed to resist scans. It was more than just a defense. It was a statement. "Captain?" Korik, the communications officer, interrupted. His voice was tight with anxiety. "Another transmission from the humans. They've initiated communication again." Varek's eyes narrowed, his ears straining to catch every word of the transmission that came next. He knew the humans were playing some sort of game, but he had to understand their moves first. "Captain Varek," came the voice from the calm but firm, the same voice that had spoken their peaceful intent earlier. "This is Captain James of the Earth vessel Thunder. As I stated before, we come in peace. We ask that you not provoke us, for our fleet is capable of far more than what you have seen." The words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. No threats, no promises, just a quiet, confident warning. Varek's claws dug into the edge of his console, his mind calculating the implications of this new piece of information. The humans were not only prepared, they were willing to stand their ground and speak openly about their capabilities. But why? Why were they so calm, so sure of themselves? "How should we respond, Captain?" Brell's voice broke through his thoughts. "They're waiting for us to make the next move." Varek's eyes flicked to his fleet's strategic overview on the laser plasma display. The ships were positioned in a defensive formation, but something about their posture felt off. It was as if the entire fleet was holding its breath, unsure of the next step. The captain took a deep breath, his voice quieter now. "We can't let them test us like this, but we can't attack either. We don't know enough about them yet." He turned to face Brell, his mind still racing through possible options. "Prepare the fleet for a full scan. Get closer to their vessel. Let's see if we can provoke them into revealing more." Brell nodded and immediately began relaying the orders, his fingers flying across the controls. The crew worked in synchrony, each motion precise, but full of the uncertainty that had gripped them all. The human vessel Thunder remained where it was, unmoving, its presence like a dark star at the edge of their world. The lights in the command room seemed to dim as they closed the distance, and the energy in the air thickened, with the promise of something that could no longer be avoided. Varek's heart beat louder in his chest as he stood, watching his crew work in a steady rhythm. They had prepared for conflict. They had trained for moments like this, but the unease gnawing at the edges of his mind was new. This wasn't a traditional standoff. This wasn't just about firepower. "Captain," Korik called again, his voice laced with tension, "we're receiving another message from the Thunder. It's a direct transmission this time. They're bypassing the formal channels." Varek's eyes locked onto the communication screen. The human captain's calm face appeared, though this time there was something more in his gaze. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet challenge, a recognition that the next move was theirs. "Captain Varek?" Captain James's voice resonated through the room, its calm steadiness only making the words hit harder. "You're approaching dangerous territory now. We've shown you restraint. We've demonstrated our readiness to engage. But don't mistake this for weakness. We ask again, respectfully, for you to hold your fire. Do not force us to show you our true power. We are not here for war unless you make it so." The message left a cold silence in the command center. The crew exchanged glances, their minds racing to interpret the implications. Varek felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice steady. "Prepare to power up our weapons," he said. "We're not letting them dictate our next move. But be ready. If they make one wrong move, we respond in full force." His claws clicked against the console again, but this time there was no relief. The game was far from over. The room was alive with energy, the sharp clatter of controls and muted chatter creating a quiet tension. The laser plasma displays flickered in sync with the growing unease of the crew. Varek stood still, his eyes fixed on the hum of data moving across the heads-up displays. He could feel the weight of every second hanging in the air, as if the entire galaxy itself was waiting for the next decision. "Status update," he called, his voice steady, though his chest tightened. He could see the human vessel, Thunder, maintaining its position. Still, every movement from their ship felt calculated. Too perfect, almost unsettling. Approaching coordinates, Captain. We're within a few clicks, Brell reported. His voice clipped, but controlled. Energy fluctuations are increasing. It's as if they're preparing for something, but still no weapons. No movement. Just waiting. Varek's eyes narrowed. The human vessel was positioned perfectly between the 2 points, hard to approach, hard to engage. And yet the humans had made no attempt to flee or escalate. It was as if they were testing their limits, testing his. A low murmur spread among the bridge crew as Varek's tail swished in quiet contemplation. Something was off. The longer they waited, the more tense the room became. It wasn't the human ship's silence that disturbed him, but the calm restraint in its presence. The feeling of an unseen weight. Are we still tracking the power buildup from their ship? Varek's voice cut through the tension. Yes, Captain, Brell answered immediately, tapping a few keys. But it's not traditional. No immediate signs of weapon loading, just energy flowing in subtle pulses, like it's being stored or redistributed. It's more efficient than anything we've encountered. That caught Varek's attention. His thoughts churned, but his mind had only one question. What were the humans preparing for? This was no ordinary encounter. Their lack of immediate hostility made it even more dangerous. The fearlessness in their defensive posture spoke of experience in combat that hadn't yet been shown. Varek could feel it. Whatever they were waiting for, the humans were fully aware of the risks, fully aware of their power. Power down all non-essential systems, Varek ordered. We need to reduce any unnecessary signals. Let's make sure they can't get a read on our intentions. The bridge crew scrambled, working in practiced synchrony to adjust the ship's systems, the air thick with the subtle scent of cooling metal. Varek focused on the heads-up display, watching every shift in the human ship's formation. If it had been any other species, they would have charged ahead. The humans, however, waited. The very fact that they hadn't yet acted sent Varek's nerves fraying at the edges. The silence on the bridge was thick, almost suffocating, as Varek stood motionless, his claws curling into fists. He wanted to act, to escalate. But there was something deeper, something not yet revealed, that held him back. For the first time in years, he questioned his own instincts. Sir, the human vessels... Brell's voice was cut off as the display flared bright. A sudden burst of energy from the thunder streaked across the display, a quick pulse of light that was too fast to follow. The flickering display made it hard to read, but it was enough to make Varek's pulse quicken. Before anyone could respond, Korik, the communications officer, spoke up in alarm. It's moving. They've powered up their shields. Slight shift in their formation. Captain, they've deployed drones. Hundreds of them. Varek's head snapped to the display. Tiny, swift-moving dots appeared on the screen, darting in formations that defied their tiny size. Get those drones tracked. They're testing us, he muttered under his breath. They didn't just deploy them for defense. They were probing. Testing the alien fleet's reaction, just as Varek had expected. They're coming in at irregular intervals, Captain, Korik continued, his voice strained. They're not following any standard military protocol. Varek's eyes sharpened. This wasn't just an attack. It was a dance, a dangerous game of cat and mouse. They were trying to gauge the alien fleet's weaknesses. They were trying to outsmart him. Reposition the fleet. Maintain formation, but stay alert. I want tactical analysis on every one of those drones. Identify their purpose. Let's see what these humans are made of. The crew quickly set to work, the soft clicks of fingers on controls filling the air. But the silence outside the ship was deafening. Varek's mind raced through possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. His people had always been the tacticians, the strategists, but these humans, they weren't predictable, not like any species they had encountered before. Suddenly, the laser plasma display flickered again, a low rumble reverberating through the ship's hull. Varek turned sharply, his gaze fixed on the incoming data. What is it? He demanded, his voice tightening. The tactical officer's voice cracked through the tension. They're intercepting the drones. Captain, they've launched countermeasures, laser bursts, precise to each drone's location. Varek's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just an ordinary counterattack. The humans were adapting faster than they should have been able to. A brief exchange of fire lit up the display, and within seconds, several drones blinked out, deactivated by an energy pulse so accurate it seemed impossible. Varek leaned forward, every muscle in his body coiled. How could they possibly track that many targets at once? Brell's voice was tense as he studied the readouts. It's not just tracking, Captain. It's predictive. They're reading our fleet's movements and adjusting theirs accordingly. If they can target each drone with that level of speed and precision, they know exactly what they're doing. Varek took a slow breath, his claws curling into fists. The humans were more than just cautious. They were methodical, calculating every action with terrifying accuracy. They know our tactics, but they don't know us. Not yet. For a moment, the bridge fell into an eerie silence as Varek stared at the incoming data. The drone's pulse signals had stopped. There were no more countermeasures. The human ship had gone still again, but this time it felt heavier. Status on their weapon systems? Varek asked, though he already knew the answer. If they were waiting for something, he could only guess at what it might be. But one thing was clear. He wasn't dealing with mere warriors. These humans were playing the long game. Still nothing, Captain. No weapons are charging. But we've picked up a strange signal, a low-frequency transmission, almost like a warning. It's not coming from their ship, Brell said, his voice thin with confusion. It's as if they're trying to communicate something to us. Varek's heart skipped. A warning? From them? Or from someone else? Focus on that signal, he ordered, a sharp edge creeping into his tone. And prepare the fleet. This is far from over. The mystery deepened, and Varek, though his confidence had not wavered, knew that the real test was only just beginning. The stillness in the room grew oppressive, the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing down on every crew member aboard the ship. Varek stood at the center, his eyes locked on the laser plasma display as the human vessel remained eerily still. The quiet was punctuated only by the faint sound of fingertips gliding over console keys, the tension thick enough to cut through. The unexpected signal from the human ship continued to pulse faintly across their sensors. An encrypted message too complex to decode at first glance, but one that carried a distinct undercurrent of urgency. The words were hidden beneath layers of military-grade encryption, but even the frequency alone told Varek something important. The humans were no longer on the defensive. They had shifted, and now they were communicating in ways that left more questions than answers. What are they trying to tell us? Varek asked, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. His clawed fingers drummed against the console in frustration. It felt like waiting for a storm to hit, the quiet before the strike. The dread hung in the air, thick and unrelenting. The communications officer, Korik, peered at the data coming in, his antennae twitching in concentration. His tone was low, almost regretful. I don't know, Captain. We've never encountered anything like this before. It's not a standard message. The encryption is layered with too many variables. It's almost as if they're trying to show us something. But we can't yet see what it is. Varek's mind was racing, each second stretching longer than the last. His eyes darted across the data streams, the complex patterns on the heads-up display flickering like shifting shadows in the dim light. There was no sign of an attack, but the human ship's shields remained solid, its movements deliberate. What did they want? What were they waiting for? Shall we approach? Brell asked from behind him, his voice tight. The tactical officer's eyes were fixed on the advancing human vessel, his fingers hovering over the controls. He understood the stakes just as much as Varek did. Every move from the Thunder was deliberate, every second a potential tipping point. Should we make the first move? The question was charged with tension, but Varek didn't answer immediately. The air felt thick with the weight of his decision. If he made the wrong move, it could spell disaster. But if they didn't act now, the mystery of the humans could cripple them in the long run. Maintain position, Varek ordered, his voice firm. Don't engage until we know more. We need to understand what they're doing. There was a collective shift as the crew adjusted their focus to the subtle changes in the human vessel's energy. The tension in the room thickened, each crew member bracing themselves for what might come next. Suddenly, the laser plasma display flared to life, the screen flickering before it stabilized. A burst of static echoed through the comm system. The human vessel, Thunder, was transmitting again. But this time, the message was different. The calm restraint of Captain James's earlier transmission was gone. There was no greeting, no formal words. Just a cold, calculated statement. "This is Captain James. You were warned. We will not let you force our hand." Varek's stomach dropped, his heart racing. The words echoed in the room like a countdown, a warning of something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The humans were prepared, but for what? What did this final, stern message truly mean? Were they really ready to fight? "They're not just testing us anymore," Varek muttered, his voice barely audible. "They're preparing for something we don't see yet." Brel glanced over at him, concern flickering across his features. "What should we do, Captain?" Varek paused, taking a slow breath. He could feel the heat of the moment building. A slight tremor ran through him, and he knew the crew could sense it too. Their minds were on edge, waiting for him to make the call. "Full scan," Varek said, his voice firm despite the unease gnawing at him. "Let's find out what they're really capable of. No more guessing. We need facts." A low murmur rippled through the crew, but everyone moved quickly, their movements precise. The ship adjusted its course as they initiated the full scan on the Thunder. The display shifted again, and the heads-up screens updated with a new set of data. Higher energy outputs, minor shifts in their shield frequencies, and strange spikes in their propulsion systems. The human vessel was no longer passive. It was preparing to move, to react. Korik spoke again, his voice tight with anticipation. "Captain, the energy surges. They're like nothing we've seen before. It's not just power, it's a focused buildup. It's almost as if they're waiting for us to make the next move." The hairs on Varek's neck stood up. This wasn't just about defense anymore. The humans were anticipating their actions. They knew the risks, and now they were pushing back. "Status on our defensive systems?" Varek barked, turning toward Brel. "Do we have anything that can match this level of energy?" Brel didn't hesitate. "Our shields are fully powered. But, Captain, if they engage with that kind of force—" He didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. The implication was clear. The human vessel was more advanced than they had first believed, and their power, controlled and focused, was more than just a show. Varek clenched his fists. The time for cautious diplomacy was over. They had given the humans every chance to back down, every opportunity to communicate peacefully. But now, the human ship was moving towards a confrontation, and the assembly could only stand by and watch. "Deploy countermeasures," Varek ordered, his voice like steel. "We're not going to wait any longer." As the ship's systems adjusted, preparing to engage, the laser plasma display flickered once more. The human ship Thunder was now moving, closing the distance with a series of fluid, calculated shifts in its formation. It wasn't rushing. No, it was too methodical for that. But the pace was steady, a dangerous certainty in its movements. Varek could see it now. The humans weren't just waiting for him to act. They had been waiting for him to hesitate. Then, in a stunning display of tactical brilliance, the Thunder shifted again, disappearing from the view of their sensors. No explosion of speed, no warning. It simply vanished, like smoke slipping through the cracks of reality itself. "Captain!" Korik shouted, his voice sharp with alarm. "They've—" The words were cut off as the ship's systems flared into action. The display scrambled, a chaotic jumble of incoming data. But one thing was clear. The human ship had disappeared. For the briefest of moments, it was as though they were nowhere to be found. Varek felt his heart stop. The silence in the room was deafening. "Where the hell did they go?" Brel demanded, slamming his fist into the console in frustration. Varek's voice was low, barely audible. "They've outmaneuvered us. Again." The bridge fell into an unnerving silence. broken only by the faint clicking of keys and the sharp rustle of movement as crew members adjusted their stations. The human vessel, Thunder, had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but a cold, unnerving void in its wake. Varek's claws dug into the edge of his console, eyes scanning the chaotic data flooding in. Nothing about this encounter was going according to any strategy they had anticipated. "Report," he barked, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. Brell, his eyes locked on the fluctuating data, was the first to respond. "Nothing, Captain. They're gone. No heat signatures, no disturbances in the surrounding space. It's as though they never existed." Varek's jaw clenched. "That's impossible. They can't just vanish." "Captain," Korik spoke, his voice tinged with a note of disbelief, "I'm picking up something else. A secondary signal, faint but constant. It's coming from a nearby asteroid belt." Varek's eyes snapped to Korik. "Asteroid belt?" he asked, his mind already turning over the possibilities. A place like that could easily hide a ship, but it didn't explain why the human ship would be there. And why hide in plain sight? If they were so confident in their capabilities, why retreat? "Can you isolate the signal?" Varek pressed. "Attempting now," Korik replied, fingers dancing across the console. A moment of quiet passed, thick with anticipation. Finally, Korik's voice cut through the silence. "I've got it. The Thunder, or something similar, has reappeared in the belt. They're maintaining position, Captain. They're not moving." Varek felt a chill creep down his spine. It was as though they were being led into a trap. But what was the goal? To provoke them into making a move? To see if they would take the bait? "Maintain course, but prepare for immediate action," Varek ordered. "We need to draw them out." Brell worked quickly, maneuvering the ship toward the asteroid field. His movements were quick but calculated, the familiar rhythm of battle readiness flowing through the bridge like a pulse. Each crew member was on edge, but none dared to speak their fear aloud. The unknown was thick in the air, intangible but undeniable. As they approached the asteroid belt, the laser plasma displays flickered to life, showing the fragmented rocks, scattered in disarray. In the distance, the dim outline of the human ship appeared, like a shadow among the debris. It didn't move. It didn't even react as the assembly ship neared. The silence felt deafening, as though the whole universe was holding its breath. "Open comms," Varek ordered, his voice steady despite the confusion and the unease gnawing at him. The transmission crackled for a moment, then settled into the calm, confident tone of Captain James. "Captain Varek, I'd advise against coming any closer," James said, his voice clear and even. "This is not a confrontation you want." Varek clenched his fists. "I don't need advice, human. I need answers." There was a brief pause, then James responded, his tone unchanged. "You've seen enough, Captain. What more do you need to understand? We've shown you our capabilities, and we've demonstrated our restraint. But we've also made it clear that we're not here to fight. We're here to protect what we've built. And if that means defending ourselves against forces we don't understand, we'll do it. Now the question is, do you understand what we're capable of?" Varek's teeth ground together. He was being pushed, but it wasn't anger he felt. It was something else, an underlying fear. This was not a species that was going to back down. They weren't afraid of a fight. They were measuring their steps, and everything they did was calculated. "Your ship is still in position," Varek said, his voice laced with a quiet challenge. "I don't see how you can call this peaceful." James's laugh, soft and sharp, echoed across the transmission. "You've seen our firepower, Captain. You've seen what we can do. The fact that we haven't acted speaks more than any words could." The transmission ended with a click, leaving the bridge in tense quiet. The crew stood motionless, staring at the dim outline of the human vessel in the distance. "We need to prepare," Varek said, breaking the silence. "But we're not making the first move. Not yet." The asteroid field loomed ahead, its jagged edges and floating debris now feeling more like a maze where the walls could shift and the path was uncertain. The ship moved cautiously forward, the crew on edge with every slight adjustment, every minor shift in the data. Varek could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. "We're within range of their ship," Brell said quietly. His fingers hovered over the console, his gaze darting between the incoming data and the tactical projections. Their energy levels are fluctuating again. It's like they're measuring us. Wait for my command, Varric instructed, his gaze fixed firmly on the display. The Thunder was still unmoving, its shields a barely detectable shimmer, its weapons dormant but active enough to send a pulse of energy across the void. It was like watching a predator wait for its prey to show weakness. Varric took a slow breath. Get us closer, but hold back until we're sure of their intentions. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one dragging, as the ship slowly closed the distance between the asteroid field and the human vessel. Varric's thoughts raced. This wasn't just a tactical evaluation. This was something else entirely. The humans had shown restraint, yes, but they had also shown mastery. They weren't acting out of fear. They were waiting. Every move was measured. Captain, Brell said, his voice sharp with urgency, we've got movement. They're positioning their drones again. The tension in the room escalated as the drones deployed, their small, swift forms cutting through the debris. Varric's gaze locked onto them. The human ship wasn't retreating. It was testing their limits, probing for weakness. This wasn't about conquering territory. This was about proving something. Activate countermeasures, Varric ordered, his voice low but commanding. But do not engage until they force our hand. The crew began their work in unison, fingers flying over consoles as they readied their ship for whatever might come next. The Thunder was still there, unmoving in the asteroid field, its quiet presence growing more menacing with each passing second. Get ready, Varric murmured to himself, watching the human ship, waiting for the moment when it would reveal its true intentions. The next move was theirs to make, and Varric had a feeling that the mystery of the humans, everything they had shown so far, was about to unravel in the most unexpected way. The asteroid field stretched out before them, a jagged maze of rocks and shattered fragments that seemed to mock every attempt to predict their movements. Varric stood rigid in front of the laser plasma display, watching the small dots of light indicating the position of the human ship. Thunder. The drone movements were erratic, almost too erratic. A brief flash of bright light from their shields, the glint of their energy emissions. Then nothing. The tension in the bridge was palpable, the weight of the silence pressing down on each of the crew. Captain, the drones. They've stopped moving, Korik said, his antennae twitching in frustration. It's as if they're waiting for something. Varric's eyes narrowed. Waiting for us to make the next move. Captain, Brell's voice cut in, low and urgent. The drones aren't just waiting. They're positioning themselves in our blind spots. It's like they're testing our response time. They've seen our tactics, but they haven't seen everything we can do. They're waiting for us to act. Varric's thoughts were a swirl of calculations, each one louder than the last. The human ship had backed them into a corner, had lured them into this field with their patience, and now they were waiting. Varric's claws gripped the edge of the console as if the physical action could ground him in the storm of uncertainty. They're provoking us, he muttered. But this game, they don't understand how we play it. Brell adjusted his position, casting a glance at the swirling chaos on the displays. If we let them provoke us, we're walking into a trap. They've already shown us their speed, their efficiency. If we don't make a decision soon, we'll be sitting ducks. Varric didn't look away from the laser plasma display. The human ship's movements had become a mirror of their own. It was as if the Thunder was mimicking their tactics, adapting in real time to their every move. Varric had seen species fold under pressure, seen them break in the face of superior tactics. But these humans, they weren't like the others. They weren't responding to the game they were used to. They were shaping it. Hold tight, Varric commanded. We're not moving until we know what they're really capable of. Let's make them show us their next hand. Another silence gripped the bridge. The low murmur of equipment, the click of keys, the soft tapping of claws on the cold metal. Varric could almost taste the tension in the air. It wasn't just the mission. It was something deeper, an unspoken understanding that this encounter was different. Every instinct screamed for action, But something inside Varek, something darker, told him that reacting impulsively would give the humans exactly what they wanted. "Are we sure their weapon systems are down?" Varek asked, the question slipping from his lips before he realized it. The idea had been gnawing at him, but he hadn't dared voice it aloud. What if the humans weren't just waiting for them to act? What if this was another test? What if their power was much greater than they had let on? Korek's voice was quiet as he ran the data. "Everything we've seen points to their weapons being dormant, but their shields remain active. They're not running, just waiting." A ripple of unease flowed through the crew. The air around Varek felt heavier with each passing second. Waiting. It was exactly what they were doing too. The humans were playing the long game, and they had already shown a disturbing level of restraint. "Get us closer to their position," Varek ordered. His voice was steady, but the words felt heavy in the air. "But prepare to pivot at a moment's notice. We might not get a second chance." The bridge crew moved with the fluidity of well-trained soldiers, their eyes scanning every inch of the display, every curve of the asteroid belt. But Varek's mind was elsewhere. Every decision now felt monumental, each move pushing them closer to a point where there would be no turning back. The ship crept forward, its movement subtle against the backdrop of floating debris. Varek's senses were on high alert. The faint taste of static on his tongue, the soft buzz of the ship's systems in his ear. He could feel the weight of the moment. It was as if the entire cosmos had come to a standstill, waiting for something to break the tension. A sharp noise broke through the stillness, a flash on the laser plasma display. "They're moving," Korek reported quickly, his voice tight. "The thunder! They're accelerating!" Varek's eyes shot toward the display. It wasn't a full maneuver. It was more like a slow, calculated shift. But the movement was undeniable. The human ship was adjusting its position, angling itself directly in their path. "What are they doing?" Brel asked, more to himself than anyone else. Varek didn't answer right away. He could feel it in the air, the sudden shift in the dynamic between the two ships. The humans were playing their own game, but this time it was clear. They weren't here to just test the boundaries. They were drawing a line in the sand. "Activate shields," Varek ordered. The words slipped out almost automatically. "Prepare to engage on my mark. Korek, get a live read on their systems. No more guesses. I want to know everything." The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, the unexpected happened. The thunder shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just an evasive maneuver. It was a deliberate action, a pulse of energy so focused that the ship practically hummed with intensity. But what really made Varek's blood run cold was the message that followed. This time it wasn't just a call for peace. "This is Captain James." The transmission crackled across the comm system. The voice was clear, unshaken. "You've had your chance. We won't be your target." "Not today." Varek's chest tightened, his mind racing. The humans had made their move, and it wasn't one he had anticipated. "Captain," Korek's voice trembled slightly as he looked at the readings. "They're charging something. It's unlike anything we've seen. The energy readings are off the charts." Varek stood frozen for a heartbeat. Everything, the calculations, the strategies, everything had led them to this point. And now they were facing something far more dangerous than anticipated. "They're not just playing defense," Varek muttered under his breath, the realization settling like ice in his gut. "They're drawing a line in the sand." "Shields are fully charged, Captain," Brel said quietly. "Ready for whatever comes next." Varek turned toward the crew, his gaze steady but uncertain. "Brace yourselves. We're about to see just how far they'll go." The moment of truth had arrived. The calm before the storm, the very edge of the unknown. The bridge was quiet. Too quiet. Varek's eyes flicked over the heads-up display, tracking the movements of the thunder as it shifted its position, deliberately maintaining its distance. Every crew member was poised for action, but their patience was wearing thin, each second feeling like a trap, and the air in the room was heavy with anticipation. The human ship's movements were like a predator sizing up its prey, and Varek wasn't about to be its next victim. "Captain," Korek's voice cut through the tense silence, "I'm picking up energy surges from their ship. Multiple systems are powering up. This is more than just defensive posturing. Varek's heart skipped. They're preparing something, he muttered. How much time do we have? Not much, Brel replied, his eyes darting between the screens. The energy fluctuations suggest they're charging something big. We need to make a move soon or we'll be caught off guard. Varek's eyes narrowed and his fingers drummed steadily on the console in front of him. The human ship's strategy had been one of patience, but now they were making their intentions clear. This wasn't just a show of force. This was the beginning of something more, and the assembly was standing at the edge, waiting for the inevitable push. Deploy the countermeasures, Varek ordered. His voice was steady but carried the weight of decision. Activate all energy shields and prepare for an immediate evasive maneuver on my mark. Brel nodded sharply, his hands moving swiftly across the controls. The ship's engines whined slightly as the systems came to life, and the hum of activity buzzed through the quiet tension. Varek didn't look away from the laser plasma display, his focus sharpening. He could feel it now, that rising sense of certainty. The humans had shown them restraint before, but this was something else entirely. We can't let them dictate the pace, Varek continued, his voice now cold and methodical. If they think we're afraid to strike first, they'll control this encounter. We'll show them we won't be pushed around. On the display, the human vessel was almost motionless, its systems glowing brightly, the shields active, but their weapons still dormant. The longer they waited, the more it felt like the calm before the storm. Suddenly, a flash on the display. A sharp, cutting line of light streaked through the asteroid field, and before Varek could process it, the thunder reappeared in his field of vision. It had closed the gap, cutting through the scattered debris with an almost elegant swiftness. Varek's heart pounded. The humans had been moving in a calculated, deliberate manner, but now they were no longer holding back. Their ship was positioned in such a way that they could strike at any moment. "Captain," Korek's voice cracked through the growing tension. "They're closing in fast. All systems." "Hold tight," Varek interrupted. "Prepare to deploy our own countermeasures. I want the first volley to be ours." The crew fell into their roles. Brel and the tactical team made final adjustments to the ship's course. Varek stood, staring into the display as if trying to read the human ship's movements like a living thing, trying to predict what would come next. Every instinct screamed for him to act. But this wasn't about the first strike. It was about the right strike. The seconds stretched into an unbearable eternity. "Now!" Varek snapped. The ship lurched as they executed a sharp turn, moving quickly to avoid the trajectory of the human ship's presumed course. The laser plasma shield shimmered around them, an almost tangible force field locking them in. For a split second, Varek could feel the weight of the moment. This was no longer about posturing. This was about survival. As their ship moved into position, the human ship's energy signature spiked again. But this time, instead of firing, the thunder, in one fluid motion, disappeared from their view once more, shifting between the asteroids and vanishing into the fractured debris like a shadow. Varek's pulse quickened. "Where did they go?" he demanded. Korek quickly responded, his fingers flying over the console. "They're gone, Captain. No energy signature, nothing. It's like they're playing with us." "How?" Varek's voice was almost a growl. "We've been moving at full speed, and yet—" "Captain, we're not moving fast enough," Korek interrupted, his voice tight with tension. "We're not adapting quickly enough to their tactics." Varek clenched his fists. The human ship had a distinct advantage in this environment. The asteroid field, dense and shifting, was their perfect playground. They were more nimble than the assembly's ship, faster, and in this confined space they could afford to vanish and reappear at will. It was the perfect trap, and they were walking straight into it. "Think, Varek," he muttered to himself. "What would we do if we were them?" Brel glanced over his shoulder. "Captain, you're not considering—" "I am," Varek cut him off. "We've been too predictable. If they can move so effortlessly through this field, we need to think differently. Their shields are formidable, but they're not invulnerable. If they can evade us, we can force them into a position where they can't hide." He turned to the crew. "Prepare the stealth drones. I want the thunder in our sights, closer than they expect." With the tactical team nodding in unison, Varric watched as the small fleet of drones powered up. These were different from anything they had used before, smaller, more agile, designed specifically to infiltrate and confuse enemy sensors. The humans thought they had the upper hand, but they were overlooking one crucial factor. The assembly had its own hidden strengths. Varric's voice was a low command, cutting through the growing anxiety. "Launch the drones, scatter them, let's turn the tables." The drones shot into the field, their movements sharp and unpredictable, darting between asteroids and veering in ways that seemed almost reckless. Each one was designed to emit false signals, redirecting their sensors and creating confusion. For a moment the bridge went quiet, all eyes locked on the display. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Would the humans take the bait? Would they bite? A flash of movement caught Varric's eye. The Thunder was back, only this time it wasn't moving alone. It was surrounded by multiple smaller crafts, drones similar to their own, launched with surgical precision. The humans had already anticipated their next move, and now they were responding. "Damn them," Varric growled. "They're always one step ahead." Korik leaned forward, his voice calm but urgent. "We need to adjust our approach. They're anticipating our every move." Varric's mind raced. This was the crux of the encounter. The human ship wasn't just a powerful force in the field. It was an intelligence-gathering machine, adapting faster than they could think. The challenge now was no longer to outfight them. It was to outsmart them. Varric stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the chaotic swirl of asteroid debris and the human ship's shifting position. The Thunder had once again disappeared into the field, its movement so calculated that Varric's mind was spinning, his patience running thin. The entire encounter had become a game of chess, one where every move, every second, felt like it could tip the balance. But this game was different. It was more than just a contest of tactics and strategy. It was about proving who had the resolve to survive, who had the strength to endure. "They know us," Varric muttered under his breath, as if the words could release the suffocating weight in the room. "They understand us better than we understand them." Korik's voice was tight as he adjusted the data feeds. "They're pushing us, Captain. Every maneuver they make, every shift in their positioning, it's like they're anticipating our moves." Varric exhaled sharply. The pieces were falling into place. The Thunder wasn't just outmaneuvering them, it was forcing them into a corner, making them question their every instinct. They were no longer the hunters. They had become prey chasing shadows, but it wasn't over yet. "Brel!" Varric snapped, his eyes flicking to his first officer. "Set the course. Full speed ahead. We don't wait for them anymore. We take the initiative." Brel's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded quickly. "Understood. Full speed on your mark, Captain." As the crew scrambled to execute the orders, the tension in the room escalated. Each breath felt like a drag, the quiet anticipation building to a deafening crescendo. Varric could feel it now, deep in his bones. This was the defining moment. They weren't just fighting a ship or a crew. They were fighting a species that had survived against impossible odds. A species that had found a way to become stronger with every failure, every war, every challenge thrown their way. "Their drones are scattering," Korik reported. "They're trying to create another diversion, Captain. But we know what they're doing now. We know how they think." Varric's heart raced. He had seen the humans' restraint, their adaptability, and their strength. But it wasn't enough. Not this time. Not when the line between survival and extinction had become so thin. "Not this time," Varric said, his voice low and firm. "We've been letting them dictate the tempo. We take control now. We show them why they made a mistake testing us." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the bridge as the ship surged forward. For the first time in the entire encounter, Varric felt the weight of certainty. This wasn't a battle for supremacy. This was a fight to prove who could endure, who could adapt. The humans had been playing a dangerous game, showing restraint, showing mercy. But Varric knew something they didn't. Mercy could be a weakness, and weaknesses could be exploited. As the Thunder reappeared, a cold sense of purpose settled over Varric. The human ship was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity had endured, everything they had fought through, the wars, the deaths, the crushing weight of their history. And now they had to pay for that arrogance, for thinking they could stand against the assembly and walk away unscathed. "Full speed ahead," Varek ordered again, his voice a quiet roar. "Close the gap. Bring them within range." The ship responded with a sudden burst of speed, its engines firing with a ferocity that shook the bridge. The asteroid field blurred around them, rocks scattering in their wake. Varek's pulse quickened, but he didn't look away from the display. This was it, the moment when the human ship would realize they were out of options, out of moves. The assembly had learned their tactics, had played their game, but now, the true test of strength would begin. "Captain," Brell said, his voice steady despite the tension, "we're in range. The drones are still circling us, but we've locked onto their ship. Ready to fire on your mark?" Varek's fingers hovered over the command console. The weight of the decision was enormous, but the moment had arrived. The Thunder had underestimated them. The assembly was far stronger than they had realized. They had a history, a culture forged in conflict and survival. And now they would prove it. "This is it," Varek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've pushed us to the edge, but this time we push back." He slammed his fist down onto the console. "Fire!" The blast rang out, the sheer force of it shaking the ship to its core. The energy pulse streaked toward the human ship, cutting through the debris like a scythe through tall grass. Varek's eyes locked onto the display, his breath held in his chest. The pulse struck, and the Thunder shimmered, its shields flickering, but holding. Then, in an instant, the human ship was gone, vanished, slipping back into the shadows of the asteroid field, its presence erased as quickly as it had appeared. Varek's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a retreat, it was a message. "We're too slow," Korik said quietly, his voice tinged with awe. "They've adapted. They've seen everything we can do, and now they're one step ahead." Varek slammed his fist against the console, frustration boiling over. "Not yet. They may think they're winning, but they don't understand what we're capable of. It's not over." The crew worked feverishly, but Varek's mind was elsewhere. The human ship had shown its true nature, yes, but it had also shown that it could be pushed, could be cornered. And that's when it would strike. The question wasn't whether they could defeat the humans in combat. It was whether they could force the humans to break their own rules. A new signal flashed across the display, this time coming from the Thunder. It was clear now. It wasn't a simple maneuver. They were being baited, pushed into a confrontation that could end everything. "Captain," Brell said softly, his voice taut with tension. "The message. They're asking for a ceasefire, a truce." The message flashed on the display. Varek read it once, twice, and then slowly sat back in his chair. "We've proven our point," the message read. "We've shown you what we can do. We will stop this fight now, if you choose peace." The silence in the room was deafening. The human ship had shown restraint once again, but this time it wasn't a display of mercy. It was a challenge to everything the assembly had ever believed about strength. "Make no mistake," Varek said, his voice low but sharp. "We've won this war, not through our weapons, but through our will. The humans have shown us what they're capable of, and they have learned that we are not a species that breaks. We fight, and we survive." He turned to his crew, his eyes hard and resolute. "This isn't just about victory. It's about proving that we, our species, our way of life, are not to be underestimated, not by them, and not by anyone else." And in that moment, Varek realized something deeper than the strategy, than the tactics. The fight for survival wasn't about the clash of weapons. It was about the strength to endure, the ability to keep fighting when it seemed impossible. And humanity had done that, had fought through every challenge, every war. They were stronger for it. Varek's voice softened, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. "Accept their terms. Let them know. We're ready for peace, but only if they understand what it means to earn it." The transmission went silent as the human ship's presence flickered in the distance once again. And for the first time in a long time, Varric allowed himself to relax, even if only for a moment. The battle had been won, not through force, but through will, and the humans had earned their place in the galaxy.